Welcome back. Whenever we have a conversation about price controls, the classic example is rent control. So let's use rent control as a case study to think about differences between policy outcomes in the short run and in the long run. So we're going to think about rent control. So rent control in the short run versus the long run. So to do this, we're going to set up two supply and demand diagrams. So we'll set up one for the long run and one for the short run. So for each one, what's our price when we're talking about rental properties, apartments, etc.? The price is just rent. So rather than calling it price, let's just go ahead and we'll call it rent. And we'll just go ahead and call it quantity. I mean, you could call this units if you wanted to, but we'll just use a Q for quantity. All right, so why do we need to think about the short run versus the long run? Well, let's think about the short run first, and then maybe the long run will become more apparent to us. So in the short run, imagine that city council gets together and they pass a policy unexpectedly at whatever, their Friday afternoon meeting, and they say, effective Monday, this policy goes into place that puts a limit on rent. So in the short run, that means these apartments, these units, these rental properties are there, they're built, they're established, they're either on the market or people are already renting them. So the supply of rental units in the short run is fairly fixed. It's fairly inelastic, right? So this is our short run supply. And what about the demand for rental units in the short run? Well, there are only so many people in the community. That doesn't change in a weekend between, say, a Friday and a Monday. It's going to take months or years for that to happen. So our demand is fairly inelastic as well. So this world's been cruising along. There's some equilibrium amount of rent. Right, so this is our rent equilibrium. I don't know, let's use round numbers, call it $1,000 a month. All right, so call this $1,000. And city council passes this regulation, this price control, on a Friday afternoon that says landlords can no longer charge rents above $800 a month. Or maybe they even just fix rent and say rent is $800 a month. So we have our controlled rent. Right? So controlled rent. And for our example, we said suppose it's $800. Again, this isn't market numbers. We're just choosing numbers that make this math easy to remember in our head. So that means it doesn't matter if you're renting 1 unit or 1,000,000 units, your rent is $800. That's what you can charge, that's what people pay. So at $800, at this cheaper rent, now a few people are going to want to rent that weren't renting before. So think maybe you've got a set of roommates, and if the city council passes this program, then one of those roommates says, oh, well now I can afford my own place, I'm going to go rent my own place. So what's happened is that renters have moved down their demand curve, at least some of them, and we've got a small problem of a shortage. So this makes sense. If a policy pushes down rent, more people are going to move out. They're either going to move out of their parents' places or they're going to move out of living with a roommate, and we're not going to have enough apartments because the number of apartments is fixed in the short run. All right, now let's take a look at the long run. So why do we get different results? Well, let's think about the two sides, right? So with time, so we'll put a few notes down here. So with time, landlords can convert their buildings, from apartments to offices or vice versa. Right, they can take their properties and they can do other things with them. Shoot, maybe some of them just decide they're not going to rent it, they're going to live in the thing instead. But all of this takes time. So that means with time, our supply curve is much more upward sloping than in the short run. I guess we could also put one other thing on here, right? With time, landlords can convert buildings from apartments to offices or vice versa. Or build more apartments. But again, that's going to take time. So with time, now we have this supply curve that looks much more like a traditional supply curve. It's upward sloping. When rents are really high, landlords are trying to figure out how do they provide more units to the market. They build more units, they convert offices to apartments, they convert finished rooms over a garage into a garage apartment, etc. So our supply is upward sloping and much more responsive to price in the long run. So our story here is that supply is more elastic in the long run. In fact, let's just put that in the middle here. All right, so from the short run to the long run. So short run to the long run, supply is more elastic in the long run. And what about demand? Well, it turns out we said demand was fairly inelastic in the short run. There are only so many people in the city. But with time, demand also becomes more elastic. People can move to town. It gives folks time to think about, do they actually want to move out, live on their own, etc. So from the short run to the long run, supply is more elastic. Demand is also more elastic. It's also more elastic. All right, so why is that? Because with time, more people can move. So that might be to the city or move out of living with a roommate, move out of living with their parents, etc. Right? But all of that takes time. So with time, more people can move and demand is more elastic. So what's sort of our sub-bullet for each one? So with time, supply becomes more elastic and demand becomes more elastic. Demand becomes more elastic. All right, so what does that mean for the effect of a policy? So in our diagram, if we mark in our initial equilibrium, right, so we called this rent sub E, that's our equilibrium rent if there's no rent control involved. And then the city council passes a policy for controlled rent. So rent goes from $1,000 down to $800. What's happened? Well, before we had a shortage in the short run. In the long run, we still have a shortage, but now it's a much bigger shortage. some of these apartments that were available when the policy got put in place are going to be taken off of the market, taken offline, converted to offices, etc. Some folks who weren't living in the city because they couldn't afford $1,000 a month are going to say, oh, well, at $800, now I want to move there. So we've got the quantity supplied reducing over time and the quantity demanded increasing, so our shortage is even larger in the long run. So the distortion of this policy of price controls is increasing with time. All right, so what's our takeaway? From the short run to the long run, supply is more elastic, demand is also more elastic, and that means that our shortage is larger in the long run. I know there are a lot of moving pieces here. We're thinking about price controls, in this case a price ceiling. We're thinking about elasticity and different elasticities in the short run, in the long run. There are a lot of moving pieces, which is why policy is difficult to get right, and it's why we sometimes make mistakes. But hopefully, if you're getting a feel for these ideas, you can start to apply them to your thinking about policy, and maybe we use our economics to make good decisions. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.